Morning, good afternoon, good evening. In his recent X handle, Professor Jonathan Moyo was criticizing the ANC party in South Africa for forming the coalition with the Democratic Alliance in that country following the election results of the 29th May 2024 elections. In the article, he headlined ANC the first liberation movement to hand power back to the whites. It is, of course, an outrageous statement. Pathetic, in fact. Only a nincompoop with not even a single drop of democratic value would say such a thing. What happened in South Africa, all South Africans would agree, including the people themselves, the electorate, the contestants, and those who observed the elections, would agree that those elections were free, fair, and credible. And once you've met that threshold, then it is logical to say the result is therefore the democratic will of the people of South Africa. So if the people of South Africa, in a free, fair, and credible election, decided that they will not allow ANC, the majority, to govern, that is their will. And if ANC had rejected that, just because they are saying, no, we cannot be handing over power to the whites, in this particular case, the DA, they will be denying the people of South Africa a meaningful democratic say in the governance of the country. Of course, this comment does not come out of the blue. We all know who Professor Jonathan Moyo is. He is a ZANU PF thug. ZANU PF has never believed in the people of Zimbabwe having a meaningful democratic say in the governance of the country. Never. Compared to ANC in South Africa, ANC did not pay lip service to free, fair, and credible elections, freedom, justice for all. Even before the end of apartheid, ANC is one of the few, if any at all, if there are any other ones that I don't know of, Black nationalist movement who came up with the Freedom Charter. This is a covenant of ANC with the people of South Africa, saying these are your fundamental rights and freedoms that ANC is fighting for. That ANC is risking life and limb and asking you, the people of South Africa, to join in this struggle to end apartheid. They honored that promise. On the other hand, ZANU PF paid lip service to one man, one vote, freedom, justice. And as soon as the country was getting anywhere near becoming independent, the ZANU PF was already committed, if it had its own way, the Lancaster House Constitution would have been brushed aside. ZANU PF wanted a one-party state from the word go. A one-party state, by its very nature, is basically saying the party in power is the only one that has got the right to govern. And you, the people, have no say in that. The right to a meaningful say in the governance of the country entails giving the people the right to vote for who they want to lead them. ZANU PF had no such whims. Never. If they had their way, Zimbabwe would have been a de facto one-party state, or de jure one-party state from the word go. It is interesting that ZANU PF has never allowed free, fair, and credible elections ever since 1980. The party has rigged elections throughout. The only time when the country came nearest to having free, fair, and credible elections was in 2008, after SADC leaders had intervened to coerce ZANU PF to carry out fundamental changes in the electoral system to make those elections in Zimbabwe at least meaningful. In 2008, March 2008 elections was the nearest the country had ever got to holding free, fair, and credible elections. And when ZANU PF realized that the party was losing, none other than Mnangagwa himself stepped in with his Joint Operation Command friends. They ordered ZEC to stop declaring the results. And then they went on to spend the next 6 weeks counting 5 million votes. And in the process, whittling down Tsvangirai's 73% of the vote, according to Mugabe's fraudulent slip, to 47%, enough to force the runoff. And during the runoff, the junta carried out its Operation Mavotera Papi, which was basically the junta punishing the electorate for having rejected ZANU PF in the March vote. The country witnessed the worst electoral wanton violence in our history. It is disheartening, most disheartening, that here is a party, particularly the likes of Jonathan Moyo, who, by the way, is in hiding since the 2017 military coup that ousted the late dictator Robert Mugabe. And Jonathan Moyo happened to be in the wrong basket, the wrong faction, the G40. And Mnangagwa and his Lacoste faction emerged as the victors then. he had to go into hiding. He's now in Kenya. And you think, could the years in exile, hiding in his foxhole, had given him time to reflect on what is wrong with Zimbabwe's political system? But no, not at all. He cannot accept that South Africa is a healthy and functioning democracy and that ANC were rejected by the people of South Africa. And the ANC leaders did the right thing in accepting that democratic will of the people of South Africa. To him, the ANC is giving power back to the whites. Just as, I suppose, ZANU PF has been rigging elections under the pretext that all opposition parties in Zimbabwe are backed by the West and they are just puppets there to execute their master's will to have regime change. The people themselves right to a meaningful say in the governance of the country, which includes the right to vote out anyone that they see is not fit to carry out, to rule the country. In Zimbabwe, no, that is considered unacceptable. There must be no regime change. Why not? Isn't that the very basis of free, fair, and credible election? That the ultimate expression of that democratic will is to vote somebody out of office. It is extremely disappointing when you read articles by people like that Professor Jonathan Moyo. I'll just play a video clip where, since his time in exile, he's given several interviews, shedding some light into Mnangagwa and this Lacoste, or as Mnangagwa calls it, the second republic. Let's just listen to this.
Are you corrupt? No. In fact, this is laughable. Seriously laughable. First of all, this is an accusation coming from the most corrupt politicians and public officials in the history of our country. They cannot account for the assets that they have. The richest individual in the Republic of Zimbabwe is Emmerson Mnangagwa. The one person who was responsible for setting up ZANU PF companies when he was the Secretary for Finance of the ruling party is Emmerson Mnangagwa. There is no cent that comes from those companies, including a bank, including investments in the region, in countries like Namibia and even South Africa. The person who led the plunder of resources, even in foreign countries such as the Democratic Republic of Congo, leading to the United Nations investigating and coming up with a report that is still there, is Emmerson Mnangagwa, along with the military cabal of General Chiwenga, SP Moyo, the person who brought the Chinese to plunder Chiadzwa diamond resources for Zimbabwe, up to a point where we have, at the very least, over a period from 2007 to 2014, some 12 to 15 billion dollars in diamond revenue that remains unaccounted for, that went into the pockets of individuals. These people have staged a coup not just to grab power for the sake of grabbing power, but in order to cover up their corruption. That command agriculture was nothing but a looting scheme.
Well, after listening to that, one has got to ask, so in this particular case, why is it that the people of Zimbabwe should not be able, are being denied the opportunity to remove this regime, this corrupt, which he himself admits is corrupt and incompetent? And by the way, the period is talking of when 12 to 15 billion US dollars in diamond revenue alone was looted. Jonathan Moyo was in the ZANU PF government. And interestingly enough, it also covers the period when MDC were in the GNU of 2008 to 2013. One of the tragedies about the MDC is that Mugabe bribed them. And in fact, yesterday I was talking about an article that was published by George Charamba in the Herald, in which Charamba was admitting that during the GNU, MDC leaders, because they were hungry for power, for position and fame, they failed to implement even one reform. The GNU was the golden opportunity for Zimbabwe to implement the democratic reforms and restore the people's right to a meaningful say in the governance of the country. It is a pity that Morgan Tsvangirai and company were easily bought off and they forgot about the reforms. And thus leaving us stuck with this corrupt and incompetent regime. ZANU PF has managed to stay in power by denying the people a meaningful say in the governance of the country. That is at the heart of our problem. And for people like Jonathan Moyo to try to justify that in the name of we can't hand over power to the whites is an outrage. In the case of South Africa, the DA, yes, has got whites in them. But the 30 years that the DA has existed in South Africa, it has served the people of South Africa and served them well. And that's why they keep voting for them. To reject them on the basis that they have got their roots in apartheid because they are white is ridiculous. In the case of Zimbabwe, ZANU PF has justified rigging elections on the grounds that the opposition, MDC, CCC, is backed by whites. The party has only had a sprinkling of whites in the party. So the regime could not, in all honesty, accuse it of being a white-led party. So they had to come up with some other feeble excuse. You're backed by the whites. Of course, it's all nonsense. If there has been any illegal cooperation between the MDC CCC leaders with the whites, then the evidence should be brought before a court of law and let the guilty part be judged, and if found guilty, punished. And so for the regime to be punishing Triple C on the basis that they are backed by foreigners without having produced the evidence before a court of law is pathetic. One of their favorite ones is that the opposition invited sanctions that were imposed by the West on the regime. That too is a pathetic argument. The regime itself, on one breath, insists that the opposition are puppets. And when it suits them, they want us to believe that the puppets are now dictating to the puppeteer the foreign policy. Of course, it's pathetic. Zimbabwe will never get out of this hellhole that we find ourselves until we implement the democratic reforms to ensure free, fair, and credible elections. It's a pity that MDC guys, when they had the opportunity to do so, they sold out. Not only did they fail to implement even one token reform during the GNU, but post the GNU, they've been participating in flawed elections, knowing fully well that the process is flawed, knowing fully well that by participating, they're giving ZANU PF legitimacy. But they continue to do it out of greed. The picture I've chosen there was President Emerson Mnangagwa meeting the Russian President Putin recently. In the video clip that was leaked out, Mnangagwa was telling Putin that he is being isolated and particularly accusing Zambia of being armed by the Americans. In other words, he's asking for weapons from Russia to fight off Zambia. This is an unfortunate development, but it's not surprising at all. Mnangagwa is desperate to hang on to power, and he will drag the nation into a regional or a war with our neighbor for no other reason than that he is desperate to hang on to power. This is one of the consequences of allowing a dictatorship to stay in power, in our case, 44 years and counting. They have enjoyed absolute power all those years. They've become addicted to power. The prospect of letting go is unthinkable. Mnangagwa blatantly rigged last year's election. Even the regional election observer and the continental condemned the election process as flawed. Indeed, his quarrel with Zambia emanates from that. The gentleman who chaired the SADC election observer team was Dr. Neves Mumba from Zambia. And Zambia president happened to be the SADC chairperson of Troika, the organ that deploys election observers. And so Mnangagwa, when the report came out that the elections were flawed, took it personally. His regime's attack of Dr. Mumba was shocking. Here is a case of if you cannot handle the message, attack the messenger. And Mnangagwa was taking this one step further, telling Putin that Zimbabwe is under attack. Nonsense. Absolutely, utterly nonsensical. But that is the reality. ZANU PF is desperate to hang on to power and will do anything to retain power. And that is the truth. That is the reality that the people of Zimbabwe have got to deal with. To come back to the issue of the DA ANC coalition, it is the democratic wish of the people of South Africa. The elections were free, fair, and credible, and that was the result. And I salute ANC for accepting the results, accepting that they've lost after 30 years in government power in that country and going into a coalition. It is a democratic wish of the people of South Africa, and it must be respected. And we are going to denounce nincompoops like Professor Jonathan Moyo, who would have wanted South Africa or ANC to reject that result in the name of we are not giving power back to the whites. The people of South Africa knew the composition of the DA party. If Professor Jonathan Moyo knows that those whites have got the same policies of apartheid, then he should produce the evidence. And clearly, the South African voters did not have that evidence. And hence the reason why they voted for DA, making them the second biggest party after South Africa's elections. It is a pity that we never seem to learn from the past. And I'm disappointed. I seriously thought that after the 2017 military coup and Professor Jonathan Moyo and a few other G40s having to run away from their former colleagues, they would have the time now to reflect on what is wrong in Zimbabwe. And I'm disappointed that anyone would come up with such a foolish statement as Professor Jonathan Moyo came up with here. Liberation movements, as much as the nation would appreciate their contribution, towards fighting to end oppression does not give them the divine right to oppress, which is exactly what ZANU PF has done ever since our independence. In Zimbabwe, we only removed the white oppressors to replace them with the black oppressors. Just as in the military coup of 2017, we removed one dictator and a few around him, only to replace him with yet another dictator. We are still stuck with a dictatorship in Zimbabwe. Corrupt, incompetent, and tyrannical dictatorship. That is a fact. The events in South Africa is important in the sense that it has underlined that very fact that you can be a liberation movement party, but it is the people's will that will prevail, whether or not you'll continue to remain in power. This is a fundamental political reality that we have to see happen in Zimbabwe. And I hope it will happen in Zimbabwe. Thank you very much for listening and have a good day.